Hey there guys, hope you're well. Welcome to lesson number 13 of my Tutorial Tuesdays from Beginner to Pro series. Last week what we did was we plotted out some of the reference points for this eye. What I've done is I've really lightened my pencil strokes up now. I like to do them darker so you guys can see where they're going. So I've taken out the reference lines and I've really lightened this up. And what we're going to be using today is we're going to be using our 2H pencil, HB and 2B in some areas. So I'm going to be moving this picture around, particularly the reference image. So what I've actually done is I've just trimmed off the outer edges. If you cast your mind back to last week, I had some of the excess paper around the edge. So I've just trimmed that down just so that I can get more of the paper into camera sight, into view. So starting off with our 2H pencil, we're going to start finding some of these darkest areas. Now obviously the darkest area when we're drawing an eye is always going to be the pupil. So using our tapered stroke, just going to start filling some of this pupil in. Now remembering we're not pressing hard, I am turning my paper so that I've got my stroke, which is a tapered stroke, which is pulling towards me. Had quite a few conversations with you guys on the Facebook group. If this is your first time to my channel, go and check out our Facebook group. It's called Tutorial Tuesdays Beginner to Pro. Ask to join and I will accept that and bring you in. But I've had a few conversations with people and on some of the earlier lessons that we did, some of the spheres, barrels, and even with some of the baby portrait, one of the things that I noticed is some of your values are covered with lines that you can actually see, and one way to try and avoid that is by moving the paper around so that you're not just going in the same direction. What we're doing is we're building up a value of hundreds and hundreds of lines which is sort of crisscrossing. I guess it's a kind of a cross-hatching effect. Now, I'm going to take a liberty with this, and I know that the darkest point in the pupil is going to be right in the centre, so I'm just going to try and bring out just a very subtle, darker point in there. And it's looking for just some of those fantastic opportunities to give you some depth and some dimension, and that's really what is fantastic about drawing. Now obviously my printer prints this as black, it sees this as black, but with our pencil we can come in darker in some areas and slightly lighter in others, and it just brings in that sense of realism. It really just makes your drawing pop. I've had some lovely comments from you guys recently over on the Facebook group. I've even had some of you start following me over on Instagram, which is cool. I'll follow you back if you're on there. So it's at Artistic Nick. It's N1K, same as the YouTube channel. Be brilliant to have a look at some of your work on there. If you need some advice on Instagram and things like that, I've not got thousands. I've got, I think I'm nearly at 3,000 followers on there, but I can tell you about hashtagging and things like that and how to take a better photo of your art. So straight away now I'm going to start coming in with the HB, because I know I'm going to go up to maybe a 7B in there. So taking the HB pencil now, and again just getting some of the graphite in the centre, working this tapered stroke over my initial layer of 2H, and it's very difficult to see this on the video. It probably looks like I'm going up and down and scribbling up and down, but actually what I'm doing is a downward stroke, downward stroke, downward stroke, almost like I'm whipping eggs. I also like to think of it like an aeroplane coming into land, hitting the runway and then taking back off again immediately. And what this does is it gives you a thinner start line and a thinner exit line, and it makes it so much easier for you to blend those together so we don't have these harsh edges which are unrealistic. It's easy to do hair. It makes it much easier to get a nice coverage. Okay, so I'm happy enough with that. I've got a pretty nice layer of HB in there now. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to come and try and find another very, very dark area, so we can see that this in here and this crease coming around there are another two of our very dark areas. So if we start to come into this area there, and I know that the way that light works, that in this area here is going to be the darkest, so I'm going to try and get that into the drawing. Make sure that this is still in frame, that you can still see it. It's been really fun seeing some of your progress. We've got some fantastic artists in the group already, but it's been really good seeing some of you that have never really attempted anything like the baby portrait and having a really good crack at it. I will say to you that practice is the most important thing. Keep practicing the spheres. I keep practicing spheres even now. If I've ever got a pencil or even a biro or a ballpoint pen and I've got a scrap piece of paper, I just try and draw a realistic sphere or a barrel. Now don't worry initially about your first layer of 2H being absolutely smooth. The smoothness comes as we add some of the softer pencils in there. So we just really, what we're doing with these initial hard pencils, and I know there's some of you out there that have said to me you've never used a 2H pencil or a 4H pencil before. With the harder pencils, what happens is the particles of graphite or carbon, whatever it is, because it's a harder pencil, they're much smaller, and they get down into the pit of the tooth, right down deep into the tooth of the paper, and we start to fill the tooth of the paper up as we go through the pencils. And what it does is it gives you a really lovely coverage and a very rich value with the pencils. Now we could easily go in with a 2H pencil, sorry, a 4B or a 6B pencil in these darkest areas, and just use a tortillon, which is a paper stump, and just flatten the tooth of the paper down, because that's ultimately what we're doing when we're using a device like that. Even being overzealous with a soft tissue, we flatten the tooth of the paper down, and although it gives us a nice coverage, what happens then is it's impossible for us to take any of the value out. So when we're looking in areas like this and these areas in the iris, it's going to be so important that we can take this value out using our kneaded eraser or another type of eraser. And if we've gone in there and we've, by accident or on purpose, we've created this flat look to the tooth of the paper, it does two things. It stops you from taking value out. And the second thing, which I had a conversation with somebody only the other day, is it leads to something called graphite shine. Now, because graphite is such a smooth particle as it comes off of the pencil, when it lays flat, what happens is it reflects the light. It's unavoidable, completely unavoidable when you are using pencil, but we can keep it to a minimum. And this is the best method that I've come across that stops that. Now, your only other option is to use a charcoal. Now with charcoal, that doesn't reflect the light because it's a much rougher sort of matte finish, but this method allows you to still create something that doesn't have that glare. You look at these drawings that people have used, tortillons and pencil stumps and Q-tips and things like that, and they look okay from certain angles, but you hang that picture up on the wall and immediately what happens from certain angles is you've got this very unrealistic shine to it. So the pupil of somebody's eye will look shiny, or the black trousers that you've drawn look shiny, and it just doesn't add to the realism. So by filling up the tooth of the paper with your harder pencils initially, and then layering on top of that with the softer pencils, what we get is we get this lovely rich value without the shine. Obviously, if we're going up to 7Bs and things like that, in some of the areas you are always going to get a little bit of what we call this graphite shine, but nothing in the realms of what we get when we flatten the tooth of the paper. So if you cast your mind back to the barrel exercise, and we were talking about soft edges and hard edges, or clean edges. So we can see here that this is what we'd call a clean edge, this value here. There's a separation between this part of the skin and the eyeball itself. So I need to have a definite finish from this value to this value. Now what we have, let me find one. So here, for example, this isn't a clean edge here. The actual printing is not fantastic with this printer that I've used. So what we're going to have here is we're going to have a gradation. We don't want a line in here, so I'm going to go dark, 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 lighter, 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 lighter. That's going to give us the impression that this is rounded. This needs to give us the impression that this is separate to this, and you'll see these on certain areas. Again, this is a clean edge to value, so it comes up and around and back into this crease. This is the furthest away from the light, and then it comes back round again. And we're going to try and find as many opportunities to bring that out as possible. So I'm just now finding this clean edge and working from dark to light is always the method that I use. Once I've gone dark, I can then start to bring the value up around everything else, and I know when to stop. If I work in the lightest areas to start with, if I go too dark in the lightest area, I then have to ramp up the darkness in everything else, and it can be this vicious cycle of bringing the value up in one area, then realizing that I've got to bring the value up in somewhere else, which then means that I've got to adjust the entire drawing. Doing it this way, starting in the darkest areas, allows me to get to a point where I'm able to stop, but also I'm building up a true reflection of the entire drawing. I'm using the pencils in the darkest areas, and I can then use the paper and have a look at where things are lighter, and we've got these mid-tones and things like that, and it just helps me build up an overall better feel for the drawing itself. So I'm just going to bring some value into this crease now. Now what I'd see a lot of artists do here is bear down with a 4B or 2B or something like that in here, and then just use the stump to bring the value down. And although it's going to look okay, we're not going to be having to get these very subtle highlights in here. It's going to be very difficult to do that. Whereas with this method that we're using, we're not flattening the paper, and therefore we are going to be able to take that subtle value out in those little creases, those small hairs that we've got on this close-up here. There's very small hairs, little pits in the skin. There's a lot of hairs here. And it's just going to give us that overall quality of the drawing, the look of it. So I'm just getting some value into, like I say, that area there. It'll be really exciting when we start coming into learning how to draw some of these white wispy hairs. Very, very simple technique that I'll show you. If this is the first time that, like I say, you've come across my channel, go and check out the rest of the videos. You can find a playlist on my YouTube channel. If you go to my channel. At the top you've got videos, and then the next one along is playlists. If you have a look in there, I've got the Tutorial Tuesdays from beginner to pro playlist, so you can have a look at all of the videos from lesson 1 all the way through to where we are now, which is on lesson 13. I can't believe we've done 13 lessons already. Don't forget, leave me a comment down on the video. Let me know who you are and where you're from, and if you're part of the Facebook group. I'm really wanting to keep the group as positive as possible. I've spoken to a lot of you, and you've all had quite similar experiences, I think, with other groups over on, particularly on Facebook, and a lot of the art groups on there are so negative, and there's a lot of negative comments flying around and lots of spam and people asking for rate my drawing and how do I do this and whatnot, and it's not really constructive. So I'm really happy to say that so far in the group we've started to build a little community up, and we're all sort of wanting to learn and get better. And I've got no problem with people posting their artwork up on there, as long as it's their work, and as long as they're adding benefit to the group, then that's fantastic. But I can't believe how quickly it's growing. You know, we're well over 1,000 members of the group now. So I'm just working now on this darker ring around the edge of the iris here. And again, the eye being a sphere, being a ball, I know that the edge here is going to be darker. So I'm starting there, and I'm still working with my 2H pencil. I haven't moved from that yet in any of those areas. I'm just sort of building up I suppose you could call it a map of the areas that I'm going to need to keep dark. That's always so important. The contrast is vital. I see so many drawings that are fantastic. You know, they've got a brilliant sketch. It's accurate. The details in there are brilliant, but it just lacks contrast. So we end up with this sort of washed out looking image on there. And what I would say to you, if you want to really study realism, is go and have a look at some black and white photographs and just train your eye to pick up on where are the absolute darkest areas, and they're always going to be eyes, around the eyes, eyebrows, the mouth, the hair. Even if somebody's got blonde hair, there are going to be areas in that hair that are absolutely dark, pitch black on a black and white photograph. And just try and recreate that, and that's something that took me quite a long while to master. And I say master, I've not mastered anything yet. I'm a pretty good artist. I'm quite competent in realism. I don't do hyper realistic drawings that you see. I've got a lot of admiration for the people that do them. They take months and months and months, and some of them are absolutely enormous. You know, they're meters high off the ground. So we're starting now to get somewhere with this. Got a few funny bumps in there. And it's areas like this that I would see people neglecting. Don't neglect these. Yes, it's going to take a little bit more time, but the final result is going to be so much better for it. Always look for the darkest areas, even in the slightest of wrinkles. Where is it darkest? Where is it lightest? And can you contour that shadowed area into the lighter area? Just like we were doing with the patches in lesson 1, I think it was. We were trying to understand how the pencils worked. And if we could take the value of the pencil from dark to very light with every grade of pencil. So starting with the 4H or the 2H and working up into the darker pencils themselves, the B pencils, still having this gradation. I use this word a lot, but once you understand it and you start looking at things in life, whether that be a chimney stack on a roof, the wheel arches on a car, you will notice this gradation of light. It's darkest where the light doesn't get to, and it's lighter on the edges that protrude. It's one of the reasons why your shoulders and your knees will get sunburnt quicker than most other places on your body, because they are sticking out and closer to the sun. Only just, but that's taking the brunt of the light, and in the case of sunburn, the UV rays. So if you were drawing somebody and you were drawing their legs, it would be important that you had the knees slightly lighter than the rest of their leg, and that's going to give the viewer, the person that's looking at your drawing, that's going to give them an indication of how the light's working and what's forwards and what's backwards. And that's our job as artists, is to give the brain as easy a time as possible decoding what we've got down on the paper. That's dark, that means that is further away than that. That's a hole, that's dark. That's almost a hole, that's dark. This is not as dark as this, and the reason this is not as dark is because that is probably a deeper hole than this one. We can also see the light, how the light is coming in. So the light is over to the left, which means it's hitting this, it's hitting here as well, but it can't get in here. Light's not going around and bending in, it hits straight, so it's coming here. So that's why this is dark, but this is darker, this is darkest. And we can see again that the light is coming this way. This is why this area here is dark, this is dark, but this is lighter because this is the cheekbone that sits out. And then as it goes around the edge of the face of this girl here, I'm guessing it's a girl, or it could be a boy with long hair, we've got a darker area. And we're going to bring all of that into this drawing. I'm just working in this dark zone now. We've got a dark zone, but we've got a light ring around it. So what that's probably telling me is this eye it comes in, and then there's a slight recess and it comes back out again before it comes here. So I would say that this isn't quite. And I think if you cast your mind back to maybe biology lessons, or if you looked in a science book, if you look at an eye from the side, it does have this slight protrusion of the lens. And that's what this is indicating, that this comes in and then it comes back out and over again. And that's why we have this lighter area. So we're going to have that. I'm just concentrating on this area. And it's just these subtle changes of value that are so fascinating. And when you get used to seeing them, and this is why I say to you, I couldn't care less if you've traced this out, because the tracing of something or the outline of something is not what is going to make this drawing a masterpiece. It's these subtle values. It's getting this in here darker. It's making sure that we've got tapered strokes to the edges of these eyelashes, making sure that we've got these small hairs and creases. That's what's going to turn this into a work of art, not the fact that somebody's used tracing paper to plot the lines down, or a light box, or they've used a method of using a compass or the grid method I think a lot of time there's a lot of artists out there and they've got such big egos, and it's like, well, it's not true art if it's this. I saw a couple of arguments over on another Facebook group that I was on the other week, saying, you know, why are people drawing from reference photos and just copying them perfectly? That's not art. Well, of course it's art. Art is anything that you created. It doesn't need to be some abstract painting where, you know, we've thrown paint across a brick wall or something, which I actually really like in some situations, and looking in certain galleries and things, it looks fantastic. But that's not more art than what we're doing here. You know, this takes years of practice and lots of heartache and technical analysis of things, and just learning to see the world in a microscopic view, if you like, and understanding, you know, anatomy and things like that. So don't let anybody put you off from what you're doing and tell you that what you're doing is not art, or what you're doing is cheating in some way because you've traced the outlines of something, but you've created value and depth and whatnot. You know, that's where the true skill comes in. And like I say, once you've learnt these, they're very basic rules, and I do keep reiterating them over the lessons. But once you've learnt how light works, you're going to be able to turn your hand to colour markers, coloured pencils, anything, because the rules are the same. Whether I'm drawing Captain America with Copic markers, or I'm drawing a realistic eye as we're doing now, light doesn't go in there as well as it's hitting there. So I need to make that darker than that. That's the darkest, that's almost the darkest, and that in there's the darkest. And once I've got that understanding, I can translate that to any medium. Paint, digital art, watercolour, markers, anything at all. Charcoal. So we can see by making this in here darker and just feathering out the value, we are starting to get some sense of realism. We're starting to get a curve in there. We've got some details, and again, we're only on our 2H pencil. You know, we've got a long way to go with this, but we're getting a sense now of something starting to emerge. We know that this is always darker. The light doesn't get under there. The eyeball curves up and under, so that's why we've got this. You've also got one of your lightest areas on any eye is this called the waterline. It's where the water sits. Obviously gravity's pulling it down, it sits, so it's really important to get something in there, get some value in and around it, so that we can then pull that out. And one of the most crazy things that I ever learnt when we were drawing eyes is, this is not white. This is not the same colour as this paper. This is going to have value in it. And the reason it's going to have value in it is because these tiny highlights in there, they are white. If I leave it white, I can't pull them out. I've seen some brilliant drawings on YouTube, some of the videos where people just start with charcoal. They're doing the whole thing in charcoal, and they make this almost black, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, they've gone far too dark. But then as they bring the contrast up in the other areas, you start to realise that they've not gone too dark at all, and you get some fantastic looking drawings with the charcoal. I use something called Wolf's Carbon as well, so I will be showing you in some later videos. I want you to understand the basics first. I will go into charcoal, I will go into other mediums, but for me, this is how I learned. I spent hours and hours and hours and hours doing spheres and barrels and sitting and watching videos very similar to what I'm trying to do with you guys, and literally listening to every single word, trying to watch every pencil stroke and trying to recreate it. I would go over videos again and again and watch it, rewind it, fast forward it. So I'm just starting to get a few of these striations in now, some of these darker lines in there, and I'm eyeballing these. I'm not, we don't need them to be in exactly the right place. Unless you're drawing somebody that's got a very distinctive iris. You get some people that have got, I would say there's some sort of conditions that you can get that affect your iris. And we get some patterns in there. Unless it's something like that, you don't need to be absolutely perfect with these. We're not looking for uniform lengths. We're not looking for uniform areas. We don't want it to look false and manufactured. A false and manufactured look is great in some situations, probably not what we want for a human eye. Now, if we were drawing a science fiction type piece and we were drawing a cyborg, you might have a manufactured eye, in which case it would be very important that you've got some sort of sense of accuracy and getting things absolutely circular or dead straight. But when we're working from life, that isn't so. So I'm using the HB pencil now. I've just moved up to that, and I'm just going to reinforce some of this darker area. Around the iris here. And again, as we start adding this HB pencil, which is slightly softer, we're filling in the next layer of the tooth of the paper. You might still see some white coming through. Don't be tempted to start bearing down on the tooth of the paper. Apply this gradually on purpose. Let the pencil do the work. Yes, it's going to take us a bit of time. Could have probably had most of this done now if we went with a tortillon and used a 7B pencil. But that's not how I learnt. That's not how I'm going to teach you. By all means, go and do it. I've had a go with tortillons and stumps. You can get some fantastic looking work with it, no doubt. But it isn't the way I would do one, particularly if I was doing a commission for somebody. Yeah. It's nice to know that you've got something that's handcrafted, that's taken a while. Otherwise, just print a photograph off and stick that up on the wall. People say to me, how do you still manage to sell pieces of art and stay relevant in today's digital society? And I think it's more important now, because anybody can go to a supermarket and have a series of photographs printed off their phone. Anybody can do that, but not anybody can do this. When somebody sees something on your wall that looks like a photograph and under closer inspection realises that it's a pencil drawing, that's what this brings. It gives them that wow factor. And I'm not saying you all want to start selling your work, but it would be lovely if you could. Nice to earn a few extra pounds here and there. People quite often, and again, it's one of those strange questions that nobody really likes to answer. And they're like, well, how much do you charge for these things? And obviously you can't charge a proper hourly rate for this. I mean, here in the UK, the minimum wage per hour is around about £8.50 now. I think it's gone up to. So if I'm doing a drawing that's taking me 30 hours, I can't possibly charge somebody £8.50 for 30 hours. What are we talking there? 85. Your best part of £300 for that. I mean, you could do. So I tend to charge people around about the £100 mark for an A4 piece, a portrait or something like that. So don't ever undersell yourself. But remember that this isn't like going and working in a factory or something where you are literally paid by the hour. I mean, if you can get £8.50 per hour, fantastic. Please let me know how you're doing it. But like I say, I charge around about the £100 mark for something of an A4 size. And be upfront with people. And one other word of warning, and I've fallen foul of this quite a few times, is make sure that they at least give you a deposit before you undertake any work for anybody. I've had a few people in the past ask me to do things, really long-winded work. I had one lady ask me to draw. She sent me 2 very, very poor reference images. One of her late mother, it was probably taken in the 70s, and one of her late sister as a baby, just sat in a pushchair or something. And she wanted me to draw a picture of Jesus in the background, and the mother holding the baby. Now, this wasn't a simple reference. This took me a long time to figure out how I was going to do it. It took me hours. And I completed it. She lived in Ireland, and sort of told her I'd finished it the day that I was about to send it out. Asked her to transfer the money and never heard from her since. So I think she either wanted it for free, and again I think I only charged her £80 for it. So she'd got some very sad story about it. Her father was passing away and it was for him and whatnot. So I felt almost obliged to do it, but I think it took me 20 hours in total, and I never heard from her since. So make sure that you at least get a deposit if you are selling some of your work, maybe 50% up front, and just explain to them, exactly what I've just said to you, that unfortunately there are people that don't see people's time creating something as a real job. And it's such a shame, because you're not just drawing a picture, you're drawing, as I'm sure you guys are going through right now, you're going through hours of practice and trial and error, making mistakes, doing things wrong. That's what you're paying for. You're not just paying for something that somebody's printed off the internet or taken a picture and used an app on their iPad and messed around with the colours and digitized it somehow, which again is great. You're paying for really a piece of somebody. They've put their blood, sweat and tears into trying to perfect their art. So you can see now, as I'm adding this HB pencil in, it's starting to bring some definition out, and it's looking okay. I'm happy enough with this. So continue adding your 2H pencil, a bit of the HB, maybe a bit of 2B in the iris and some of the darker areas. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe if this is the first time you've visited the channel. Give me a like on the old thumbs up, and leave me a comment down below. It'd be great to connect with you, hear where you're from, hear some of your stories. Have you had any horror stories yourself about people asking you to do art and not paying you, or refusing to pay you, or wanting it done for free? I'd really like to hear about that. And also don't forget to join us on the Facebook group, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. Hit subscribe, smack the notifications button,
follow me on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter.